The expanded U.S. ground presence in Iraq and Syria come after years of promises by President Obama that no ground troops would fight again in Iraq. This is the president speaking in June of 2014, more than a year ago.
I think we always have to guard against mission creep. So let me repeat what I've said in the past. American combat troops are not going to be fighting in Iraq again.
Just last month, President Obama also reversed course in Afghanistan, halting the scheduled withdrawal of U.S. troops fighting in the nation's longest war.
First, I've decided to maintain our current posture of 9,800 troops in Afghanistan through most of next year, 2016. Their mission will not change. Our troops will continue to pursue those two narrow tasks that I outlined earlier, training Afghan forces and going after al-Qaeda.
In some ways, Amy, the significance of their statement was that they made this kind of a joint statement, this kind of a joint appeal to all sides to end these wars, linking the various wars that are being fought, centered on the war in Syria, but acknowledging that there are wars from Afghanistan to Central African Republic that have created massive refugee flows, that the humanitarian consequences have been beyond anything anyone has seen since World War II. That was a hugely unusual decision to have the UN and the ICRC, the leading organization responsible for the international humanitarian law. This is not something that happens often, and it's a sign of the recognition of the consequences of these escalations that are now going on. The new escalation we've seen from the United States, both in Syria and Iraq, as well as the decision to remain in Afghanistan, the continuing involvement of the U.S. and others led by the Saudis in Yemen, all of these wars linked most centrally to the war in Syria have had extraordinary, horrific human consequences. And the fact that the head of the United Nations, the head of the International Committee of the Red Cross are now taking them up as a joint campaign is really a very significant sign of just how serious this is.
And then the announcement of the U.S. putting boots on the ground in Syria and would continue to do this in Iraq and Afghanistan came in almost an offhand way. It wasn't the president making a formal announcement on Friday. It was Josh Earnest, the press secretary. And before that, it was Ash Carter in a hearing in the Senate, almost offhand comment.
Right. I think that what we're seeing here is an effort, we heard it in the words of Josh Earnest, that an effort to claim this is not an escalation. It is clearly an escalation. Now, it may well be that there have been special operations forces, CIA agents, and others on the ground in Syria already. We can assume that's the case, given that the priority of U.S. strategy has involved training and arming various militias, some of which never existed, and then they tried to create a new militia that would be pro-Western, pro-American, democratic, secular, anti-Assad, but not too much because it mainly should be anti-ISIS, very specific categories. They couldn't really find exactly those militias. So last year they decided to create such a militia, train it, arm it, send it in to fight. And as we know, the result of that was the $500 million, $500 million of our tax money that went to arm and create a militia that was supposed to be 5,400 people, started with only 120 because that's all they could find. They trained them, sent them in to fight. Half of them immediately defected. The other half, well, 54 who went to fight, very quickly were either captured, defected, killed, so that when the officials testified in Congress and were asked, so how many are left? The general said, well, it's a very tiny number. And when pushed, he admitted it was 4 or 5. Not 4 or 500, but 4 or 5. So this is the kind of failure that we're seeing in these efforts. I think what we saw with the language used by the White House spokesman, by the Secretary of Defense, was designed to say, this is just more of the same, this isn't different, even though we're now acknowledging that there are boots on the ground. Maybe it's because they wear sneakers, because they're special forces. So it's sneakers on the ground. But the key question here is this is an escalation. There is one potential slightly optimistic, though very cynical, possibility here, and that is if the United States is planning to take seriously the new negotiations that just began this past week in Vienna on the war in Syria, led by the U.S. and Russia, if they intend to take that seriously, it may be that this is an immediate escalation, parallel in some ways to the Russian escalation of airstrikes in Syria, that's designed to stake out a stronger position before those negotiations really take hold. That's an old, dangerous, cynical approach to negotiations, but it's a common one. When military forces are about to negotiate, sometimes they will try to stake out a stronger position. The best possibility of this escalation is that that's what we're seeing, that this is actually an indication that we're going to be seeing serious negotiations. We don't know that. This could just be an acknowledgement that despite all of President Obama's statements, there is no military solution, that they've decided not to take those negotiations seriously and instead to push forward with precisely a military solution, even though they themselves acknowledge there is no such solution.